Hello, you're watching Broadcasting Scotland and watching the Full Scottish. I'm Cameron Archibald. Today I'm joined by Hardeep Singh, who's a broadcaster and writer, and Alison Thewliss, SNP MP for this local constituency actually. Today we'll begin with Srebrenica. It's a commemoration after 23 years of the genocide that occurred. One event was held in St Mungo's in Glasgow, and we want to hear a local tale from that area and how the event happened and the commemoration for it.
The theme for this year is Acts of Courage. We will hear from courageous people that have gone through some of the most unimaginable things. People who have suffered and yet who are here to tell us of what they endured, but also to give us that message of hope and justice for the future.
I was 19 when the war started, and it wasn't the act of courage, the act of bravery or anything else. It was just a normal cause or a normal thing for any other human being to do, and I believe that many of you, if you were to face the same situation as we faced, you would do exactly the same. I stood up for what I believe that was right at that time, and I still do, and I'm actually very, very proud of these 3.5 years that I've spent in the Bosnian army being an ordinary soldier. I believed in a country that is actually big enough to fit all the people who feel this country as their own homeland, regardless of their ethnical or national or religious background. And I still believe that my country once will become something that I actually fought for. I grew up in Sarajevo, in the capital city of Bosnia, and in 1984 we hosted the Olympic Games, and none of us actually believed that only 8 years later we can face the biggest, I would say the biggest and the most intimate war on European soil after the Second World War. Neighbors turned against neighbors, people who lived next to each other, people who were sharing their lives, should all of a sudden became enemies. Sarajevo was always an example of multicultural and multi-religious living, where people were through centuries living with each other. Sarajevo is quite often referred as to European Jerusalem. At that time we faced the fifth military power in Europe, Yugoslav National Army, that actually changed side and become an army of one people only, which was unfortunately the Serbian people at that time. They were coming after our houses, after our lives, after our families, and like I said, the only normal and moral thing to do was to stood up to this madness. So I did, and 19 in Sarajevo, I was pretty much an ordinary teenager, like 90% of the teenagers here in the UK. I was kind of more into punk music. I was listening to Sex Pistols and Clash and Ramones, and I was hanging out on the block with my mates, and then just a couple of months later everything was the same, but I ended up with an AK-47 in my hands, defending my city, my family, my home. It lasted for 3.5 years, 3.5 years of a very brutal campaign of killing the city. And I think this is the only way to explain it is actually they wanted to kill the city. They wanted to kill the evidence of that the people can actually live together. And therefore the churches are destroyed, mosques are destroyed, flats, families killed, libraries, everything just to prove that the coexistence is not possible in our country anymore. Luckily we managed to defend our city. The city is still beautiful, and it's still an example that the people can actually function when they want to, even though it's not even close to the city that I grew up, but it's still better than any other city in Bosnia. The siege of Sarajevo was the longest siege of one city in the history of modern warfare. The city was deprived of life for 47 months. We didn't have water supplies, we didn't have electricity, we didn't have food. We didn't have all those things that you take for granted in your lives today. The city lays in the valley, surrounded by the mountains. Serbs were actually taking the whole high points around the city, and it was very simple and very easy for them to do that. While people in the city were suffering, they didn't have the basic conditions for a normal life. Like I said, I've been through everything. I've seen it all. I've seen the brutalities of war, and there's one thing that I can tell you from this place, because I've been there and done that. There's nothing nice or good about the war. Nothing nice happens as a result of the war. There are heroes amongst you that without them, city of Sarajevo would most probably collapse without food. There are courageous people coming from here to Sarajevo, bringing food. And this is something that you as a society must not forget. I certainly won't. So, from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you all for being here tonight and to giving me this opportunity to talk to you. On behalf of Remembering Srebrenica and Remembering Srebrenica Scotland, thank you so much. But on behalf of me, personally, as a Bosnian, I certainly can't thank you enough for actually having me here. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here.
That was a commemoration in St Mungo's Museum in Glasgow discussing the Srebrenica genocide. Alison, this is quite a touching subject. It's one that I'm too young to really remember. So if you can help me out personally as well, and just other viewers who are watching, why is this so important to remember?
I suppose it's something that I remember because it was when I was growing up that I saw this on television and was thinking, how could this happen? How could neighbours turn against neighbours? How could friends turn against friends? And how could this happen again in Europe? When we begin to think that we're kind of beyond that and we're better than that. And I suppose that's why we need to remember these things, because we need to remember how easily that can happen, and guard against it wherever we can.
Hardeep, yourself, again, I'm too young, so do you have any personal memories from you remember of the event?
Stop rubbing in that you're young, so an upbeat start to a Sunday. I think for me, more than anything, it was an exposition of our ignorance about the Balkans. It was not being taught the history of this, what was in many ways a benign dictatorship that held these countries together in an enforced union. Ring any bells? But I think also, for me personally, my best friend's Croatian, and I found that incredibly moving. And I think the bottom line is people find an excuse to have differences, even when differences don't exist, because those differences, as we are watching across the world, generate some degree of momentum for political hatred. I can't think what I'm alluding to there, Alison.
Well, when it's been 23 years since the event happened, and we were told that after World War II, something like this would never happen again, no kind of genocide, and here we are. It's, not the second time, but this is one of the multiple times this has actually occurred. How then, as a society, not just as maybe Scotland, but maybe the wider world, how do we prevent such an event ever occurring again in the future?
Well, I think we have to be careful, I suppose, in the language. The politicians need to be careful in their language and what they say, what we do, and the media have a responsibility in those kinds of things as well. And it's become all too common these days that you get reports in the newspapers of people being called traitors, people being called a threat, people being called terrorists, when these things are just not necessary at all. And we need to be mindful of that language because it pits people against people. And one of the things I've seen over the past few years, in watching some of the political language and watching some of the things, particularly that right-wing politicians have done, is they've been very adept at sort of putting groups against one another. So if you are relatively poor, working class white, they're saying, oh, these immigrants are coming to steal things from you. You know, if you are an EU national, they're putting you against people who've come from other countries and saying, well, these people are coming in and you can't get this. And this has been sort of really, really toxic. And I don't think even people have noticed how toxic this has been, but the well is getting poisoned here of our public debate, and it's happened almost without anybody noticing it, but it's groups being pitted against one another, so that you're always pointing to the next person and saying, well, what are they doing to me, rather than everyone coming together in solidarity to fight against, you know, the real wickedness in the world, of poverty, of war, of oppression, and we need to be careful about that kind of language at all times.
Hardeep, have you yourself seen this kind of toxic attitude, maybe from other people or towards yourself?
No, everything's great in the world. No, I mean, I couldn't put it any more than Alison. It's actually in the architecture of kind of patriarchal oppositional politics. If you look at the Scottish Parliament, for example, is architecturally designed so you are not facing people off. All the terminology in America just now is about across the aisle, which makes it binary. Here we have a dispatch box. You speak against folk, and when you have parties that are not majority parties, they don't know what to do with them. There isn't a place for them, and so you end up with a binary situation. It's either on or it's off. It's black or it's white. It's male or it's female, and that, I mean, without sounding like a kind of an old feminist, we need to the more gender balance we have in society at the highest levels, the more you break down things like that, mostly because you have to redefine things. You have to redefine your frames of reference. You know, the interests of the Republicans in America, for example, and the Democrats are not exclusive. You know, they have similar, they all want a decent healthcare service. There's just different approaches to getting it. So if folk hold hands instead of facing off, I know it sounds like, you know, kind of everyone's had a wee smoke and everyone's really happy and they love each other, but that's actually the way it should be. So I think this is why it's so important to have a more diverse, and when one talks about diversity, it's ridiculous to refer to 51% of the population as being a diversity issue, but the reality is, whose interests are served by the white working classes and the immigrants and women and LGBTQ folk being kept down? For example, the 5 white men that are not domiciled in the UK that own our media. That's who's going to make money off the back of Brexit, not the rest of us. That's the short answer. I'll give you the long answer later.
Well, that was certainly an answer. Alison, yourself, you know, it's all about changing perspectives, making, you know, creating more diversity. Do you believe in recent years, you know, that you've seen growing improvement? Do you think we've gone backwards a bit? Is it a mix of both? How do you see it?
I think there's definitely been steps forward. If you're looking at political representation, there's still a way to go. You know, the women are only sort of 32% of the UK Parliament at the moment. Ethnic minorities are very, very poorly served in that Parliament. And there's a big incumbency factor. So if you have been elected, you know, 5 times, you've been in Parliament for years and years and years, there's a kind of self-selection. You select somebody that looks a bit like you to replace you. Actually, we need to start to challenge those things and saying, well, if you're stepping down, we need to have, you know, somebody else who doesn't look like you coming in and changing things up.
But don't you feel, I mean, it's difficult not to agree with you, but don't you feel there are 2 components. There's the physical actual change, but there is the sense and the possibility of change. And perhaps I'm biased, but it feels, certainly within the Scottish kind of fabric of politics, actual change. I mean, who would have thought when I was growing up, I went to school up the hill, when I was growing up you said to me there'd be a brown Glaswegian fella being tipped to be the future leader of the SNP. I would never have believed you. That's how far we've come, that we have women and you know, a majority of gay women at the head of our politics. You know, and it's so important. It's so important to realise that, you know, even gay Tories have terrible political opinions when they stick to them for longer than 15 minutes. And that actually, in a strange way, humanises them. Because, you know, their sexuality's got nothing to do with their entrenched stupidity. It just happens to be located with them. So I think the possibility for change is something, because it's so kind of it's ethereal, it's difficult to put your finger on. But like, I don't feel... Like I'm probably end up standing for Holyrood at some point. You know, I nearly stood for Westminster. I don't feel that. I don't feel the road barred for folk like me. You know, the only problem is who's going to look after the shop while I'm doing the politics. See, we're doing satire here, is what we're doing. You look after the shop.
Well, okay, well, tell you what, the next subject we're discussing is Trump, so I'm pretty sure you can shove as much satire in there as you want. But we'll kick off, as we heard in the news, Trump came to Scotland, played a nice game of golf, he played with Mundell, or met Mundell, should I say. He met the Queen and the Prime Minister. He lost the Queen at some point because he went behind her. You know, obviously he came here to kind of calm down the Brexit madness. But, you know, let's get off to the main point. Do you think, overall, he was welcomed in Scotland? Alison?
I think Scotland showed him exactly what we think of him. And it was really good to see people being so creative and how they wanted to welcome him with all the signs and all the placards and all the chants and the demos.
And tanning salons have never been so busy.
Yeah. What to say about Trump, honestly? It's really quite bizarre. The whole circus is quite bizarre.
Well, what are the reasons that people have to oppose Trump coming to Scotland, in your view?
Really?
Rest the show on this. He is a bigot. He's a homophobe. He hates women. He has absolutely no concept of what day of the week it is. It's quite scary.
But the thing is, the West of Scotland's been hugely welcoming to the Orangeman. So I mean, facially, he's fine. I mean, do you not think it's ridiculous? And I hope I don't speak out of turn here. That you would have a world leader come in to meet the Queen. And I'm Republican. I'm no fan of the royal family. The ones I've met, I think, are gallus, right? They're good people. They just happen to be trapped in an institution. But genuinely, was there a person in the UK that wasn't worried about him touching the Queen inappropriately? And I don't even mean that. See, this is the point. You say satire with Trump. There is no satire left.
It's beyond that.
I was genuine. I didn't watch any of it because I wouldn't put it past him.
Yeah, likes to grab Theresa May's hand all the time, so, you know.
Thank God you said hand. At least she can still hold on to anything, poor woman, what she's been through.
Wouldn't some people, though, just say, well, actually, protesting him is just a bit of a waste of time? I mean, those who are very pro-Brexiteers, such as Ross Thompson, are saying, welcome him, they'll have a great trade deal. So, I mean, surely then, protesting him is actually going to, bring the UK backwards a bit.
No, a great trade deal with a country that its economy is on the verge of collapse because of his unprecedented tax breaks to the 1% of the American public that fund the Republican Party. But also, do you know, this is all that's wrong with a kind of a capitalist freewheeling society. There comes a point where, for me, I want to live in an independent Scotland. I don't care if I'm poorer, right? I would rather live on my feet than down my knees. And I know that sounds like a cliche, but it's true. I don't care about paying more tax if that's what it comes to. I don't think it will. But there are some moral, political, and humanitarian issues that are beyond trade. We shouldn't be selling guns to the Saudi Arabia. This man stood in front of the NATO leaders and punted American military hardware. How crass do you need to be? Some people just evoke that reaction. Very similar to the later work of Duran Duran. It really did. It split the country. And, I don't know about you, but I was hungry like a wolf.
They're not that bad.
Well, you say that.
Okay.
But Sam Le Bon was, he was definitely closer to my colour than yours.
We'll be careful. We'll be careful of that topic because we'll get into an argument. But okay. Okay, so Trump, obviously, large protests all over the country. As you said, he's bigoted, he's homophobic. Many people, there was a small minority that came out and supported him. But there's this argument that actually, well, hold on, he got elected for a reason. He must have mass support. So, Alison, in your view, do you think he has mass support? Not just in Scotland, but back home where he was elected. And if so, how does he gather that mass support?
Through very populist, simplistic messages, build a wall and make Mexico pay for it, things like that. And he didn't get the scrutiny because nobody really took him seriously as a proper candidate. And that's, a bit of a failing of the media as well over there. But he didn't get the scrutiny, he wasn't expected to answer the questions, he wasn't expected to be a successful candidate or win. So he got away with quite a lot. But there's a feeling in politics as well that people have been left behind, and people don't feel as though politicians speak for them, and they feel that it's all spin and it's all, professional politicians. And I'm as much of a feeling of that system as anything else. But
but you're not, though, are you?
That system has allowed for somebody like Trump to come in and say, "I'm different from all those guys. Trust me," and that's a problem.
But don't you think? I mean, with kind of the high watermark of our 56. The thing that was different and felt different was there were folk that hadn't been professional politicians, and that's the difference, really, is Trump is merely a manifestation of all that is fundamentally wrong with the American political system. And it's easy to blame him, but if all we did was blame him, then it's diversionary tactic after diversionary tactic after diversionary tactic. He's a symptom. The real problem is the amount of money and corruption and the lobbying in the American political system. And also this notion that he carries popular support. I mean, am I right in thinking there hasn't been a Republican president that has won the popular vote since Reagan? So neither of the Bushes won the popular vote. Well, I could be wrong. It could be Bush won. But this notion of he's got 90% support in the Republican Party. That's like me saying, I have 95% approval rating in the Denniston Bowling Club. It means nothing, because there's only 8 people in the bowling club. I hope there's only 8 people there, because then I've been rude to them. But you know what I mean? That the constituency upon which he's measuring his metrics is ever shrinking. But what's been astonishing is that the land, the home of the free and the land of the brave, has got substantial numbers of racists. I mean, look who the GOP are putting up just now. Folk that have denied the Holocaust. White supremacists who, and you got to feel some sympathy for them. For getting those pillowcases that white is difficult in a dusty condition. I made a KKK gag there. Go for it, son.
Well, speaking of white supremacists and those on the far right, Steve Bannon is in London just now, and he's having private meetings with groups who we're not fully aware of. With Trump coming up to Scotland and with Steve Bannon down south still, do you feel that, a lot, you pointed out a lot of the GOP are putting forward, extremists. Do you feel then that the Republican Party are actually, as a whole, not just GOP, but just as a whole party, they're pandering and moving towards the far right?
This is more desperate than that, I believe. When you break it down, if you look at the fundraising of the Democrats compared to the fundraising of the Republicans, and there are some parallels to be made with our own fundraising here. So, for example, the SNP have a couple of big donors, but there's lots of 5ers and 10ers and 20 quid notes. Lots and lots of them that raise the money. That's what the Democrats are in America. They have a number of big fundraisers, but actually their suffrage is small amounts of money invested in communities the length and breadth of the USA. The Republicans got themselves into such a situation, it was a dozen big donors. So they stopped. And why would you go to the hard work of hitting the phones and actually speaking to folk to get those $5, $10 donations when you've got 12 people giving you $3 billion? So those 12 people ended up wagging the dog. And what we're watching here, what I think history will show us, is that this has been... So people are asking, why are these once relatively highly regarded Republicans sitting on their hands over stuff we all know they find objectionable? It's because they are fighting for the survival and fighting hard for the survival of their party, because the Republicans are no longer relevant. I mean, what political party in this day and age, in a free country, snatches wains off the breast of their mother? Who does that and thinks it's okay?
Alison, from your point of view, do you believe that the Republican Party and Trump and Biden, those kind of groups, do you believe they're pandering or at least moving towards the far right?
They're certainly trying to get that vote. They're trying to get that kind of anti-immigration, division going as a bit of a debate, and it's really worrying. And it's almost back to where we started here about responsible language and actually making sure that people live together and that we all get on. It's kind of a bit apple and mother pie, but mother and apple pie. But it's important. If we don't have that kind of society where we can all get along, what do we have? Really, we have nothing.
But this is what's been, because I'm a YouTube addict, and the buffers there have been, because I live in the East End of Glasgow, the adverts I've been getting, the Scottish Government adverts have been talking about what it is to be Scottish.
Uppers versus Dinnies.
You know, exactly. And I'm a hardened old so-and-so. I tend not to get emotional about stuff, but I watched that and I've never been prouder of my country than just, I mean, it's a 30-second film and I know you're selling me something, but you're selling me something good. You're selling me a vision of my country and my city that I want to see happening. Again, this is what folk down south don't understand in terms of the Brexit debate we're having just now is, you know, Scotland has a different attitude towards immigrants. This city was built by immigrants. This country was built by immigrants. You know, Kingston Bridge, Jamaica Bridge, where do you think that money came from? Not Dalmarnock, I'll tell you that.
Well,
hee-haw.
You make the point that Scotland, you know, has a general different kind of approach towards immigrants. Do you believe if Brexit had a better approach, or do you believe that, you know, there's been a rise in Scotland with, you know, intolerance towards these different ethnic groups? And you know what, and also why is it, in your opinion, Scotland is generally different? Maybe not just maybe compared to the UK, but maybe, you know, it's kind of an outlier in terms of the greater European scope.
I think I would push back on your notion that we're an outlier in terms of general Europe. I think we're more typical of a wider kind of northern European country. Where, you know, if you look at places like Sweden that have shown, and you know, Germany that have shown, you know, what's the best economy in Europe now is the German economy. Which country, coincidentally, is at the highest immigration rate? Those things are linked. I think the difference. Okay, so one of my primary reasons for independence for Scotland was because I feel sorry for the people of England not having a parliament. They are the only country in the Union that do not have their own dedicated assembly or parliament. They don't know who, with the greatest respect, and some of my best friends know English people, and they're fine apparently. They have that sounds bad. There is no, and this is absolutely tied into Brexit. So the people in the northeast of England, in Sunderland, which was the second constituency to file at a 70% Brexit rate, I believe, something like that, was the constituency that technically will suffer the most from leaving the EU. People aren't stupid. How have they got to that point where the messages aren't being communicated to them? Where they, you know, in places like Cornwall, you go and interview folk that are immigrants. It's like 2% of your population. Well, it's like the bogeyman, but the brown bogeyman, you know, or the Polish bogeyman, the terrible bogeyman that comes and fixes things efficiently for a decent price and tidies up after themselves, you know.
Oh, scary.
Well, you know, what's scary about that? The fact that it shows up, you can't do it. So I think greater democratic representation in England, because listen, we don't need to make the Scottish argument to the English. We need to make the English argument to the English. You look at Sheffield, Manchester, Liverpool, Newcastle, 4 incredible cities in the north of England. So Manchester, that's, you know, the feminist movement in the factories, in, you know, the fabric factories in Lancashire started there. A city with a great history, great music, and apparently great drugs. Liverpool, a great, you know, dock. All these cities, they don't have a high-speed train link. And what high-speed train links are they building now? Ones that get you in and out of London quicker, or across London quicker. Our issue isn't England. Our issue is London centricity. I mean, the most successful city in recent history in football in England is Manchester. So why is the National Stadium in London?
I will say you missed it. Leeds, one of the great cities.
It's a shite hole.
Oh, how dare you!
Joke,
A family. That's it's actually a very diverse area. I thought you'd.
No, Leeds is great. It's just York's. You know, after midnight in York, you can still kill a Scotsman in the city walls if you do it with a bow and arrow.
I mean, I have family there, so they're kind to me and hiding me when I travel down, obviously. But I mean, I survived this far.
Now you know what it's like to be.
Alison, so from your opinion, then, you know, when you look at parties across, you know, all Europe, a lot of them, social democratic parties, they're falling, or they're going to have to go into coalitions with other parties to avoid far-right groups. But in Scotland, the SNP, they're still 11 years in power, they're still doing fairly strong. They lost seats in the last election, but they're now predicted to gain seats if there was a snap general election this year. Why is it then that, you know, social democracy in Scotland is somehow remaining strong? Or why is it in your view then that, you know, Scotland is, you know, stands out amongst many European countries falling to the far right?
I think there's a couple of different things there. I mean, in terms of the SNP, good policies, things people support, free prescriptions, good things that we're trying to do, and people are receptive to that. But in terms of the far right stuff, I think what we've had in Scotland is cross-party political leadership on this. We've not pandered in any way. Labour, when they ran Glasgow City Council, were keen to have the asylum dispersal. They asked for that. Everyone supported that. There were no parties kind of peeled off and said, oh, this is a terrible thing. Everybody cross-party backed it. They put a sign above the door of the City Chamber saying refugees welcome. And I don't know if that's something that would happen right in councils right across the UK, but it happened in Glasgow, and Glasgow was dead proud of it. We did that and we went, yeah, we welcome refugees, this is what we're about. But it's been that cross-party political leadership that everyone has said, this is what we want to do, this is what we support.
I mean, you'd get shouted down in Glasgow if you said anything that was anti, asylum seeker, anti-refugee. You'd get man-handled, woman-handled, person-handled, non-gender specific handling will be going on, but not the Donald Trump style. That's the message that's been sent from the top table, and I hadn't realised I'd forgotten about that sign.
Yeah.
See that, I'll tell you a story. Day after our friend, I was working at Radio 4 in Salford, and my then girlfriend was a Glaswegian woman that lived in London. She wanted to come up. She was feared about the outcome of the vote, and like so many other people, I said it'll be close, but it'll be fine. We'll still be in Europe. How can it be in our interest not to? Some folk will send a kick up the arse to Westminster and we'll be fine. Anyway, she couldn't get up to Manchester because there was storms. Oh, we thought those were storms. Wait. And I just sat and watched this car crash happen in front of me. And for me, it was the second car crash in 2 years I'd experienced politically. The next day, so I'm getting ready to go in the studio, and I'm sleep deprived, and I can't quite believe I've witnessed it, so I need to buy the papers just to check. So I go to the wee shop in Salford, and there's a workie behind me, and a bloody immigrant working a newsagent. What do you expect? I'm joking. It was a Sri Lankan guy. He'd just come over and didn't, and of course the age-old thing of not recognising Scottish money. But that day, I had English money in my pocket. I'm paying with Scottish money because I'm so upset. The guy goes, I can't accept this because I don't recognise it. I'm like, listen, son, Bank of England was set up by a Scotsman. We were told we'd be fine in Europe, blah, blah. I lost my rag. And the workie behind me said, either pay for that or F off back to your own country. And what I found astonishing was, how do you know I was from Scotland? That's funny, that's a punchline, that is. To a true story. That's a true story, though. That's the thing.
Yeah, I know.
There's no more racists the day after Brexit than there were the day before. It's just they feel empowered.
Yeah.
Like in America, there were no more white supremacists. It's just now you're licensed to do it. It's like when Obama became president, the African American tram conductors and stuff, and when rappers would use the N-word to greet each other, they started calling each other Prez. It empowered Black America to realise that there was potential. Similarly, when Trump comes in, you're somehow allowed to say, all Mexicans are rapists or murderers, because the big man says it.
Well, we've given, as a panel, our view of Trump for both of you, but Broadcasting Scotland was actually at the Glasgow Trump protest, so we're going to see a short video just now, and you'll just see what happened there yourself. Take a look.
Good evening, Glasgow. As we say where I come from, how y'all doing?
We're doing good.
Apparently I did not get the memo until I arrived here at George Square this afternoon that Americans, citizens, were not supposed to be in places like this today. And yet here I am, and I do not care. I am so very grateful for having this chance to be with you on a Friday night instead of a pub. And as I have borne witness, like all of you on this day, on this historic square, you have made me feel very proud to be an American in a way that I have not been able to for about 1.5 years. You have made me proud to be a global citizen, and more importantly, I am proud to be a resident Ouija. On my t-shirt, I see many effigies of Mr. Trump all throughout this place. On my t-shirt, if you can see, is a likeness of one of Donald Trump's worst nightmares, Colin Kaepernick. A young man, and I'm 40 years old, so I can truthfully say he's a young man who risked his own livelihood to symbolically kneel, and his kneel shook up the world. I am here because of him. I am here because I am standing on the side of love. My father used to say to me that the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference. And by us being here today, whether we know anything, we know everything about Trump, or whether we know very little, and the leaders in the face of the leaders who have made us more divided than in previous years, we have been saying that we are on the right side of history. We are on the side where militarism and speedy armament is not the answer to our world's problems. We are on the side of history where women and children are respected. We are on the side of history where refugees and asylum seekers are all welcome. In the words of the great civil rights leader Fannie Lou Hamer, who hails from my mother's home state of Mississippi, she used to say, there comes a time when you get sick and tired of being sick and tired. And all of us here tonight are sick and tired. And yet, the greatest problem that we face, my friends, the greatest problem that we face is not economic, it is not cultural, it is not militaristic. The greatest problem that we face is our very will to live together. And if we're going to ensure that our young people, our children, are not coming of age in a nuclear wasteland, and memories of cold politicians, bad policies, and the destruction of our climate for ignorance sake, it is going to take a revolution of the human spirit. And I'm so very proud to be here with you tonight. And so I leave you with this as we leave this square tonight, that we have so much to fight for and yet so much to hope for.
Just before I start, the organisers today are saying that people are still marching into the meadows, and the estimate is one of the biggest marches that Edinburgh has ever seen, talking of up to 50,000 people have marched today. And we know that man, Donald Trump. I mean, what can I say that hasn't been said about him over the last few days, the last few weeks, the last few months? We have lots of names for him in Scotland. Ballbag. We have baby Trump at the back. But Donald Trump is a racist who glorifies in obscene wealth, boasts of sexual assaults on women, has a cabinet full of white supremacists, Islamophobes and conspiracy theorists. He's a billionaire property speculator who claims to stand up for ordinary people, but he's a thug who's only out for himself. His speeches play with the lives of men, women and children. Asylum seekers, Muslims and immigrants are portrayed as threatening a civilized way of life and treated as the enemy within. We have celebrated his arrival not with hate, but with a carnival of resistance. With chants of no Trump, no May, racist, sexist, anti-gay. And we are proud of the fact that thousands and thousands have marched in Glasgow today, led by Nicola Sturgeon, our First Minister, on the Pride demonstration. And whilst Donald Trump and Theresa May have slavered over their special relationship, I, for one, am not interested in a special relationship between the USA and Britain, which celebrates war and weapons of mass destruction. A special relationship that excuses genocide while serenading dictators with state banquets and arms sales. I'm not interested in the UK laying out the red carpet for a man who tears babies away from their mothers, whilst he backs gun ownership, which allows the repeated massacres of school children. But I'll say this, Donald Trump, the US Embassy and others told Americans to stay indoors and not to come out when the protests were on. But I am proud of a different kind of special relationship which exists between the people of the United States and this country. Through the generations, we have been inspired, empowered, and moved by the American people. Your music, your history, your culture, your sport, and your spirit of resistance. We love Martin Luther King. We love Muhammad Ali. We love Malcolm X. We love Noam Chomsky, Bob Dylan, Billie Holiday, Marilyn Monroe, Jimi Hendrix, Dolly Parton, Bruce Springsteen, and even Britney Spears. And Rachel Corrie and Heather Hare, and many, many more, whose names will live on long after Donald Trump's name has turned to dust. We are inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement, by the Civil Rights movement, by the LGBTI movement and the history of Stonewall. Inspired by the American footballers who kneel during the national anthem for those murdered by a racist police force. So no, Donald Trump, we will not take lectures from you. We will not welcome you. We will not hold your tiny groping hands. Nor will we keep silent as you cage terrified children and force toddlers to address judges in court. But remember, in this country, Theresa May operates a barbaric immigration policy where 15,000 children grow up without seeing one of their parents and deports asylum seekers to their death or persecution. Donald Trump, we will not be silenced when you, a son of an immigrant, married to an immigrant, in a country built by immigrants, tells Europe that its culture is being stripped by immigrants. We stand in solidarity with our American brothers and sisters, and whether they are here today in Edinburgh, Turnberry, Los Angeles or Charlottesville, when Trump tries to build a wall, we will tear them down, we will resist you, we will unite, and we will defeat you. And I want to conclude just by saying one last thing. On the 30th of July, we go to court for Professor Clara Ponsati, who faces extradition to Spain. If convicted, she faces 33 years in prison if she is sent to a prison in Madrid. So I urge you to support the campaign to defend Clara and the vigil outside court. Thank you so much.
We do apologise for the audio issues of us overspeaking. We thought we were on mute, but it turns out we were not. But we didn't say anything too controversial, so I think we're okay, apart from your lovely story, of course.
Listen, I mean, that's so long, as I said to that Greek judge, if the goat's tail was wagging, he was having a good time.
But we'll get back to topic. The mention on that speech there, Aamer Anwar, was Nicola Sturgeon at Pride. And from what was said a lot on Twitter and social media, and I checked it, and I think it's true, but she's one of the first main leaders, not just in Scotland but in the UK, to actually go and lead a Pride march. I mean, Alison, yourself, how do you view that? That must be huge progress for like the government interacting with these kind of groups.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I mean, to go there, to lead the march, to speak at the rally afterwards, it's brilliant. It's great.
I mean, I think it's a scandal that our political leaders are hanging out with other human beings. I mean, what has happened to our political system? I mean, we have such an open. I mean, listen, there are still bandpots everywhere that are going to make someone's sexuality an issue. That way, there is still work to do. But I think it's, again, as a boy in this city, if you'd have told me we would have not just openly gay public figures, but openly straight public figures supporting openly gay public figures, they just become public figures. I'm really not that interested in what folk do in their bedrooms or in the kitchen. I believe that's quite popular too. It's of no consequence. It's the contents of somebody's soul.
You would say though these pride events or just events in general are quite important though, because the other day we had LGBT activist, should I say, Blair Wilson, who was recently attacked and he put his selfie online with blood in his face, and the argument could go to say, well, as long as these kind of attacks are carried out, it means that these pride events are still fairly relevant to make sure that the issues faced from homophobia and transphobia are still to be tackled.
I mean, yeah, I'm just lost for words. I mean, how's anyone's sexuality a threat to you just walking down the street? If somebody's gay, how does that? Because that's the thing. When I was at school, like the male bullies would have a go at you with kind of homophobic language, which was hilarious. Oh, don't come near me. Don't come near me because you fancy me. And I'm like, the girls don't even fancy you. Why would a gay man fancy you? Have you seen how picky gay men are? And also this thing about having a go at a gay man. Have you been to the gym? Have you seen how buff these boys are? I wouldn't mess with them. Obviously, I'm making sweeping generalizations in a positive way there. But it just, the thing for me is, so for example, as a woman, you don't operate in the political sphere solely to further the causes of women. You do it to further the cause of people. But bring in the perspective you have as a woman and understanding kind of patriarchal issues and how it is to have a degree of subjugation institutionalized across life surely makes the world a better place. I don't like puffs. I'm joking. I love puffs. Not in that way.
We know you're joking. Well, I mean, it's interesting when you overall this topic we've discussed kind of the far right, made a contrast with Nicola Sturgeon at the Pride event, and with Trump coming. And when you put all this together, for example, we had the Catholic priest that was lunged out of poles and spat on and gave abuse in Glasgow. Blair Wilson, as I mentioned, was attacked to put a selfie online. The Free Tommy advocates, they attacked a union leader in London. You could argue, this isn't just one-offs. These are creeping possible aspects of fascism, or is it just actually a one-off? These are just glaring coincidences. Do you think that this is fascism kind of creeping in there, or is just coincidences there?
I think it's something we need to guard against. It's all about language. It's all about attitudes. It's all about the things that we say and the things that are reflected to people in the press. And it's when people think that they can get away with these kind of things and that society will allow for this kind of thing to happen. So we need to kind of just keep working on all of these things and all of these issues. But in terms of the Pride March, I was on the march yesterday and it was lovely. And what was really nice is people looking out windows and cheering you on. There was an old lady with clearly her grandson or her great-grandson looking out a window on Argyle Street as we were going through Finniston. And it was great, and they were just kind of looking out the window and waving, and that's really nice. That kind of changing the generations and just seeing people out and walking along the street and celebrating in that. It was really quite nice and quite moving, actually, just to see people cheering it on.
I mean, it's things like yesterday that hopefully they will develop so that one day Protestants and Catholics can marry in Glasgow, because that work has yet to be finished. Satire again, Cameron. See how I do it? It's just effortless.
Well, I mean, you raise it. I mean, you call it satire, but I mean, in a lot of areas that would be regarded as it's actually quite hard to do. I mean, recently with the attack on the Glasgow priest, we had the leader of the Glasgow City Council write an article in the Herald saying, well, people are now getting fed up of it entirely. Not just political activists, but ordinary people are now just quite sick of this kind of sectarian divide.
Well, it's what holds our city back from being a truly global city, and I say that with no pride. I mean, we know we are an incredible city, and folk, particularly post-Brexit, are coming here and realising what incredible standard of living you can have in an incredibly educated, architecturally beautiful, groovy city with an excellent bus service. Thanks, Hamza. But we are still, for me, defined to too great an extent by what flavour Christianity are. I mean, there was a great myth when I was away that there was no racism in Glasgow. There was. It's just the bigots were too busy knocking lumps at each other to deal with us, you know. But it's. I mean, I find it soul destroying actually that that's still apparent. I mean, I had people marching through my neighbourhood a week ago, marching through my neighbourhood in the East End of Glasgow. I mean, if you want to march and be a bigot, do it in your own neighbourhood, right? Don't do it outside Celtic Park. That's stupid. That's antagonistic. Do it outside other football stadia that indulge in that sort of behaviour.
I guess the argument in there also is that, as was raised in the article in the Herald by the leader of Glasgow City Council, was that if you, for example, take on the Orange Order head on by saying you need to pay for these events yourself or fundraise them, or you're not allowed to have them, it then opens a can of worms to say, well, where does that line stop with other marches? Is it just the Orange Order that attract this kind of violence? Could you do others? So in your opinion, Alison, do we need to, is it just these individual groups we need to stop, or actually is it a wider issue, maybe better education, or is it simply just a cultural element which will have to just eventually die off and there's a lot we can do? How do you view it?
There's a balance to all things. The Pride March doesn't march every single Saturday through Glasgow. They have one march a year. Everyone comes together, everyone has a great time, it's celebrated. And I've been in plenty of marches through the city, sort of CND marches or independence marches or whatever. But there needs to be a balance, and constituents I've had are sort of getting disrupted week in, week out by some of these marches coming past their house, and that's. But I think it's a balance. It's all these things. There's freedom of assembly, freedom to express your religion, freedom of speech, all very important things. But you have to look at whether they start impinging on other people's rights as well.
I mean, how inclusive was the Orange? How many gay people were on that march, for example? Although it's a great place for gay because you've got a sash and you've got a wee twirly thing. That's perfect. All my gay friends like that shit. No, but I mean, I would rather. This is the really good thing that's happened post Brexit is I always feel much more comfortable knowing where the bigots and the racists and the xenophobes are, because if I can see them, I can deal with them. And I think in a way you don't want to push that. And I didn't say ban them. I just said not through my neighbourhood, because there's nice folk, love where I am. It's good Italian food. Don't need that. It's difficult to eat to the sound of a flute.
So overall then, not just including the order, but with the attack on Blair Wilson again, I reference the attacking by Tommy Robinson, advocates of freeing him, overall, not just in Scotland, but overall as a society, in all countries, what is it we need to do? If you had to name 3 points, what is it we have to do to tackle this intolerance towards minority groups?
One, we need a complete filleting of the political system and to be replaced with a system more akin to, well, the 19th century would be good, but let's see if we kind of get it up to the current day. So we need that. We need a relocation of the English of the UK Parliament out of London. Number 2, we need to make mainstream media more accountable. And we need to replace and regulate. Listen, I'm from the left. I believe in regulation. We need to re-regulate the press. And if you're sitting deciding what people think in this country, live in this country, pay a tax in this country, be accountable in this country, it's utterly ridiculous that the cross-media ownership is allowed to occur, because a proper media will inform people properly of what the issues are. It's too easy to blame folk for making the wrong decision, but have they made the wrong decision because they were filled full of lies and hate? It's difficult to have issue with a constituency of those in Scotland that voted to stay in the Union when they were told the lies they were told. It's difficult to have an issue with them. Let's not blame the recipients of the lies. Let's tackle the lies. And third, Friday off for everyone. That'd be great. Just a wee beer and stuff on Friday. Sausage roll. Everyone loves the Friday, Cameron. You love a few as well, son. Shut your face.
Stop it.
Shut it.
Alison, if you had to pick kind of 3 factors in general how to tackle the growing intolerance in society, or maybe not growing, maybe just louder, but if you had to you could pick 3 points, what would 3 points would you pick?
I'd say responsibility and what we say, both for politicians and for the media. You know, if the media say something ridiculous on the front page, they should have to print the retraction in the same font on the same place. And these things happen all the time. You get a tiny little apology at the back of the newspaper in tiny font where you can't find it. That kind of responsibility and what the media is putting out there. And Hardeep's absolutely right. The sort of stuff around Brexit and independence, if you've had those kind of things printed in newspapers for 30 years, your 6-week campaign's not going to turn that round. You believe what you believe because you've heard it for 30 years that bananas are the wrong shape. You know, there's a responsibility issue there about telling accurate, accuracy and truth in the media. Education, I think, is really important as well, both in schools and in society, I suppose, because we don't know enough about each other. You know, we don't chat to our neighbours as much, we don't find out what they believe in, we don't kind of have that understanding, and if we don't have that kind of conversation between people, you start to lose the kind of understanding, the compassion that people have.
But what's been really interesting, and I can't work out why this has happened, and I've seen it in America and I've seen it here, people are unprepared to change their opinions. That Winston Churchill quote about what's a fanatic, someone that won't change their opinion and isn't prepared to listen to yours. I mean, there was discourse when I was growing up. You'd actually listen to folk and kind of go, do you know what, you're right and I'm wrong. When have you ever heard anyone on a phone in or on Twitter go, do you know what, you're right, I'm convinced by what you've said has educated me? Because we see that as being weakness, you know, and actually surely learning and the ability to grow and develop is strength.
Perhaps you'll change your mind on independence and back the union.
Aye, right, son. Right, that's me.
Well, before we go, actually, because you've brought independence up quite a few times, actually, it's worth maybe just finishing on that we had a poll by the Daily Record. It was carried out by Survation, and it showed that the independent split was 47-53, so it's bigger than it was in 2014, although it's worth mentioning that poll didn't include 16 and 17-year-olds, so others would argue that it would be maybe a bit tighter, and showed again the generational gap between all groups above the age of 44 back staying within the United Kingdom, and those all below it all back independence, especially young people who back it by 70-30. So how do you take this poll, and what work do you believe that needs to be done in terms of the Yes campaign, in your view, to get over the majority line to win independence?
For me, I don't want to get over the majority line. I want to be 10, 15, 20% beyond that line. I want a crushing mandate for Scotland to restore itself to the nation it ought to be. For me, there's going to be 25% of the electorate we're never going to reach, because of them, they want to be subjects and not citizens. They will salute a different flag from me, and they will sing a different anthem from me. So let's not concentrate on them, because for me, they're a lost cause and they are a stain on our history. Sorry to write off a quarter of this population, but they also, along with those viewpoints comes a lot of other viewpoints, generally speaking, that I find unsavoury and unnecessary in a modern civic society. For the rest, it says, Alison says, I have no doubt that I will live to see independence, because I believe in truth and I believe in people. You know, there is nothing more exciting than the civic nationalism that Scotland... We have a history of leading the world. Look, we invented modern life. You know, great philosophers, great writers, great scientists, great bigots, great comedians. We've got it all. We just need to see ourselves as others see us. If we had half the respect for ourselves that the rest of the world has for us. They have in Russia, Canada, South Africa and India, they commemorate Burns in a way we don't in Scotland. That, just Wake up one day and see who we are and see what we've achieved and look around. The potential in this country is remarkable.
Alison, how do you see it in terms of the Yes campaign, improving in the poll and eventually crossing the finish line to get a majority for independence?
I think we need to get those younger people talking to the older generation as well. What is it that the younger people are seeing as an opportunity, as something that's a great shining light for the future that the older generation just don't see, and why don't they see that? So I think we need to get a bit more conversation going with those kind of different generations and amongst those generations as well, because there's older folk as well who are so disappointed in the morning after the referendum, who are absolutely gutted and don't want to be sort of tarnished with this kind of all the old people voted no, because that's not true.
I do think it's astonishing that my parents, who are immigrants to this country 50 years ago, were told they would lose everything if they voted for independence. What did they do? They voted for independence. I mean, I couldn't love my parents anymore for doing that. But also, I think what's interesting is this poll comes in a time of, unarguably, the greatest political uncertainty since World War II. I don't think that's controversial. And yet the gap is so close. I mean...
Well, you could say that that poll did come out before the resignations of Boris and others.
Of who? He was a pal of mine years ago, right? He came round my flat for dinner. He dropped the cheese board. If you can't trust him with a cheese board, how you can expect to trust him with the foreign
You just need to know everybody.
Well, I'm old. What can I say? And entertaining. Well, but I think it's because it was foreign cheese he dropped it. If it had been British cheese, he'd have kept it intact.
Listen, before I go, I just want to say thank you both of you for joining us today on Broadcasting Scotland on part of the Full Scottish. It's been great. Leave my weight alone. And Leeds is actually a great city.
I didn't say anything about your weight.
Okay.
Back off, sunshine.
But if you enjoyed what you saw today,
little chubby cheese, like a baby
if
fat.
you enjoyed what you saw today, please go to our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot, where you can go to our support page, and if you want to give a wee donation, you can see more shows like this and great more guests like this, although don't make fun of my weight.
Guess who's not taking me for a ride?
But thank you very much for watching the Full Scottish. We'll see you next week with more show, more guests. Bye bye.